My anger finally exploded at my husband, who doesn't do a good enough job at work and doesn't do any housework whatsoever. If you aren't going to do any of the housework around here, at least do a better job at work, why don't you? After that, my husband started working overtime quite literally. Every day, as if he had been replaced by a more than capable identical twin. Even while I was away on business, he seemed to be doing the housework, and I was pleased with the huge change about him. However, when I came home from a business trip, I found him in the living room in agony, and I witnessed him collapse to the floor. I hurriedly called an ambulance, and as I stood by the paramedics and watched over my husband, I found something extremely wrong with him. Something was there that shouldn't have been. My gut immediately screamed in warning, and with my stomach churning, I searched the whole house and finally opened the lid of the bathtub and realized why exactly my gut was running wild. I called to the paramedics. "I'm sorry, but this is a false alarm. You may leave now." This is the story of how my husband kept up an admittedly pretty good charade for a while, until one fateful day when I discovered the cold, cruel truth and how I got him what he deserved with stern decisiveness. My name is Shira, and I'm a 30-year-old office woman working for a travel agency. I met my husband Warren on a business trip 5 years ago, and we've been happily married for 3 years this year. We started our relationship as one of long distance, so the option of resigning when I married him seemed to present itself as the best course of action. But I chose not to do so, and instead took a transfer. Why did I choose to stay working in a travel agency, you ask? Well, it's rather simple, but I must also admit it isn't too fair on Warren. But sometimes, while it may be cruel, confronting with the truth can be so much more helpful. The reason was because I was worried about living on my husband's income alone. After we got married and started managing the household together, I obviously found out that he honestly didn't make any more money than I did. And to be frank, one could say the reason was all too obvious. Not once, in our 3 years of being married to each other, did Warren come home late after working extra hours at the office. My own job required me to work overtime and travel frequently, as it still does nowadays. But when I came home from work, he was always already finished with his bath and had already started his evening meal with a few cans of beer and some snacks from the convenience store. If you came home before me, why don't you help me with the housework? Like cooking dinner or doing the laundry, I have tried asking these things several times, always making sure to emphasize the sigh of exasperation. And he would always reply along the lines of,
"Please don't be so ridiculous. Honey, you know that I'm a terrible cook, and I never know if there are things you want to put in the laundry after you get home from work."
Warren never helped me with the housework, and he always deviated away from doing it at all because he always made excuses such as these. There were times I wish we had lived together before we got married, so I could have learned about this side of him before ever considering marrying him. But you'd have to break physics to turn back the clock, and no way was I capable of doing it, nor was I willing to. Plus, he wasn't a particularly bad person. He was just so damn lazy. So I never saw any point in arguing with him, kept my saltiness to myself, and spent my days balancing work and household chores. And then March came, and my work was in its peak season. The world was in the midst of spring break, the perfect time for traveling this way and that. I was working overtime every day, and I was on the edge of my physical and mental limits, as usual during this time of year. The reality that this only lasted about 20 days or so was a relief to me. No way would I be able to survive anything longer than 3 weeks. After one particularly busy, tiring day, I came home extremely tuckered out and grumpy. And what was my husband doing? He was laughing his ass off at a comedy show on TV, a little tipsy with a beer in his hand. There were 2 empty bottles on the table in front of the TV, and as he saw me trudge into the living room, he said to me,
Well, well, well. Look who finally decided to show up to the party. You're home late, Shira. About time, too. I can't fill up on these snacks. I don't care what it is, but could you, like, shake a leg and make something to eat?
I exploded. You're kidding, right? Tell me you're freaking kidding. If you're so damn hungry, why didn't you cook anything yourself or freaking buy something from the market just down the street? Too drunk to even stand, Why do I have to take care of you in addition to working until so damn late at night? Warren responded quietly with a sigh.
Because I'm clumsy. We both know I am. I always tell you I can't cook even if I wanted to. I'd burn shit in an air fryer so bad you'd think it contained the ashes from my dead cat mixed with a bit of honey and molasses. And I don't like convenience store food because it's too expensive.
Expensive? Then may I suggest you make enough money to be able to buy convenience store food without hesitation, If you aren't going to do any of the housework around here, at least do a better job at work, why don't you? Then, my husband, in a huff, replied,
Yeah. Gosh, what a pain in the ass. Alright, I just have to work harder, and then you'll be happy, right? I'm not feeling too good right now. I'm going out for a walk. I'll get myself something to eat while I'm at it.
And then he slammed the door behind him and left the house. He was always looking for excuses, and everything he said and did was incoherent. He literally just said the convenience store food was too expensive. And now he's saying he's going to get something as he went on a walk? The logic people have these days. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that, frustrated. But after that day, as he had declared, Warren came home a lot later than usual. Some days, he even came home later than I did.
I'm going out to eat after working late again tonight, so I don't need any dinner, Shira.
Is what he would sometimes text me during the day. I wondered how Warren, who had never been able to do his job very well and do his housework without messing something up, could suddenly start working overtime and even doing things like eating his own meals. But to be honest, not having to prepare dinner for him was quite convenient for me. It was a big burden for me to prepare meals after coming home from a very hard day's work, especially during spring break. And so, I went on with my busy life without being so suspicious of my husband's new behavior. I used to keep a household budget on my days off, and I spent a few minutes every day checking to see any anomalies or something like that. About a month into this new life with Warren 2.0, I noticed something peculiar in the budget. Warren's salary had not changed last month. He'd been working extra hours quite often, sometimes even coming home after midnight, and I knew his workplace was very employee-friendly, so all that effort truly ought to have been reflected in his salary, but it remained constant. I wondered if his workplace had miscalculated his salary. I immediately decided to tell Warren, who was watching TV in the living room. Hey, honey, you've been working overtime a lot lately, haven't you? He replied appropriately, without taking his eyes off the TV.
Yeah, I am. Because you've been nagging me to do a better job with my work.
Part of me was exasperated with that little sneaky remark, but disregarded it and got down to real business. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're trying to make a difference. But there's a problem. Your salary last month didn't reflect any extra hours. Look at this. It's exactly the same as the salary from 2 months ago. Maybe you ought to check with the company to see if they made a mistake in their calculations? Warren suddenly turned to face me in a panic and said,
No. I mean, when I say working extra hours, it's just that I'm voluntarily studying for a promotion exam. It's basically the same thing that high school students do to study for a test. That's why I don't get paid overtime.
Surprised at his vigor and the words promotion exam, I went on to say, Oh, I see. You're going to take a promotion exam?
Yeah, I've been relying on you and your salary a little for a while now, and I thought I couldn't afford to live like that anymore.
I'm so glad you thought of that. Thank you.
No problem, I guess.
The change in my husband's attitude seemed too sudden and too complete. I doubted if it was possible for a person who had never done a good job before to change so drastically, to become motivated enough to voluntarily take a promotion exam. These doubts notwithstanding, Warren seemed to have made it possible, and it was an undeniable fact that this was a good change. And if my husband got a promotion, we would have more time to live than we did at that point. I myself was very happy about him taking the initiative and trying to make life better for the both of us. I decided to accept this change and support it. However, now that I think about it, by that point, it may have already been decided that that day would come, no matter what I did. What am I talking about, you ask? Well, let me tell you. The first chapter of That Day began when I was assigned some work away from home in another city. Business trips themselves were not unusual, but this time it was a relatively long one, and I would be away from home for a week. Starting the week after next, I have to go to Boston for a business trip, and I can't take care of the house for the time being. So would you mind if I left everything to you? I hope you do understand it means that you have to do at least some housework while I'm gone.
Oh, I see. From which day to which will your business trip be on?
Warren, who usually had no interest in my job and its affairs, unusually asked me quite a few details about this particular business trip that time. I felt a little uncomfortable with his new attitude of his, but without hesitation, I gave him the details of my business trip, such as the dates, the place I'm staying, and what time I'd be back on the last day.
Gotcha. Well, good luck with that, then.
On the night of the business trip, when I checked my phone at the hotel after work, I found this message from Warren.
I want to start the washing machine, but which detergent should I use for my clothes?
I was so surprised in the best way possible. Who would have thought that he would have taken the initiative to do the housework himself? I told him about the detergent as I smiled at my phone screen. He'd been taking his job so much more seriously for a while now, and now he's even doing the housework without ever having me tell him to do this and that. I was so impressed with his recent change that right at that moment, I decided I would buy a cake to take home with me on my last day. Thereafter, my work went very smoothly, and I was able to leave for home a whole day earlier than planned. I had been away for a week, and the refrigerator was probably empty by then, so I went to the supermarket on my way home to pick up some ingredients for dinner. After that, I was going to pick up the cake. I was passing the dairy section when I suddenly stopped, unsure anymore. Did we have any milk back at home? I decided to message Warren, but that's when I realized I'd forgotten to tell him that I had finished my business trip a day early. I left a message for him, and it read, I forgot to tell you that I finished my work a day early, and I'll be coming home tonight. I'm at the supermarket just now down the street from home, and I don't remember if we have any milk left in the fridge. Would you mind checking and getting back to me ASAP? Even after I finished circling the whole supermarket, no reply from Warren. Still at work maybe? Well, it's better to have extra milk than to have none at all. So I picked up a bottle of milk and got in line at the cash register. I finished paying, and I was checking my phone in the elevator of the apartment building after walking maybe 10 minutes. Just then, Warren replied to my message from the supermarket.
Does that mean you're coming home soon? What time will you be here?
I replied to this seemingly extremely hectic response of his. I'm in the elevator going up now. He read the message and never responded. I suppose that was just as well. I'd be home in less than a minute, so there was no need to reply. I took the key out of my pocket and turned the doorknob. I'm home, but there was no answer from Warren. I walked into the living room and there he was, Warren, in agonizing pain. Warren!
An ambulance!
Are you okay? I rushed to him as he collapsed on the spot. I hurriedly called an ambulance. It took less than 5 minutes from the time I called to the time the paramedics arrived. A few medics came rushing into the house, and one of them, the leader, Dr. Fredrickson, said to me,
We are going to examine him to see if he's conscious first. If he needs to be transported to the hospital, you will need to accompany him. ma'am.
Yes, of course. Watching my husband closely, I stood by the team of medics who were making various examinations. Overwhelmed with concern, I wondered what was happening to him. I hoped that it would not be serious, and while I was observing my husband with this thought in mind, I found something extremely wrong with him. Something was there that shouldn't have been. My gut immediately screamed in warning, and I involuntarily let out a small cry. What is that? It was a bruise-like mark on his neck. What in the world is that? Upon closer inspection, however, it was obvious that it was more than just a bruise. Because it was shiny and glittery and had a red tint to it, I was absolutely convinced that I was looking at lipstick residue. The mark on Warren's neck now looked to me more like a hickey than anything else, and it as though someone had sucked on his neck. In that moment, I felt like everything up until now all drifting into place. Voluntary overtime work with no overtime pay? The rare housework done while I was away from home? My husband hurriedly answering my messages and not responding when I entered the house. The culprit, who had created the mark on his neck, would not have had time to escape until I entered the house. Everything seemed too perfect. With my stomach churning, I began to search the condo. I walked around the balcony, the closet, the bedroom, the whole damn house, when suddenly Warren's voice echoed throughout the entire apartment.
Shira! Wait a minute!
The clear voice of my husband, who was supposed to have been in a coma just a few minutes prior, made me and the medics raise the level of suspicion as to what the hell was really going on. I was convinced at this moment that Warren was not only lying, but was trying to cover up some kind of truth from me. I headed for the one place I hadn't searched yet.
Don't go that way!
I opened the shower room door and opened the lid of the bathtub and realized everything. I stared inside and thought to myself, what in the world had I worked so hard for all this time? I just wanted to spend happy days with my husband. Tears welled up in my eyes as thoughts became more and more agonizing. I bit my lip, gulped, took a deep breath, and shouted, I'm sorry, but this is a false alarm. You may leave now. Because in the tub was the true nature of all of Warren's previous changes in character. When I returned to the team, Dr. Fredrickson told me,
There was nothing wrong with his level of consciousness, his heartbeat, or breathing.
He looked extremely suspicious about what was really going on here, but then Warren himself, as though he knew he was defeated, said in a quiet tone,
I'm fine now, doctor. If I feel sick again, I will go to the hospital myself. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused you.
At my husband's words, the team left. I was about to close the door behind them. Someone came running out the doorway behind me with alarming speed. Now wait a goddamn minute. I immediately grabbed her arm. Yes, indeed, the arm belonged to the young woman who was most certainly responsible for the mark on my husband's neck. The very same woman that I had stared at in the shower room. You aren't freaking leaving until you're done with explaining, you little sleazebag, I yelled. She looked down with tears in her eyes. I pulled her by the arm and led her into the living room, where my husband was kneeling on the floor, looking very uncomfortable. I made the woman sit down on the couch and demanded answers from Warren. Who is this? Who is this woman? I asked in a deadly low voice, and he opened his mouth reluctantly.
This is Marnie, my junior colleague at work.
As I stared at them silently, the two traders suddenly started making excuses.
But she just came over to consult with you about her work. We never did anything like, adult stuff or anything.
That's right. Please don't get the wrong idea, Mrs. Joplin. I naturally sighed in disgust again. Oh, so you weren't tapping any ass? I wonder if you would still make the same excuse if you looked at your own face in the mirror. I said as I held out a hand mirror to Warren. He looked at himself in the mirror and his eyes widened.
Marnie, I told you time and time again it would be bad if you made a mark.
He stopped talking after saying that much. The woman looked away and feigned ignorance as to what he was talking about. It's too late for that. We're getting a divorce.
Wait a minute. Please. It's not what you think.
What is it then?
No, I mean, you know, this is...
His eyes were swimming as he frantically searched for plausible words to say in such a hopeless situation. I silently waited patiently for his next words, but no matter how long I waited, not even the letter S in the word sorry was ever pronounced. After all the time to think about what to say next, he said,
You're the one who was to blame because you didn't call me to let me know that your business trip was over early.
He actually had the audacity to get upset with me. I was completely fed up with his ridiculous behavior. I've had enough. You can't even apologize to me in this situation now, can you? I'm so disillusioned and so disappointed. You don't have to say anything else.
No, wait. Wait! I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Shira.
Once I said what I said, Warren uttered a hasty apology that sounded as though he'd been forced to say it. Do you think I'll forgive you if you apologize? I'll make sure you take full frickin' responsibility for this treason. Upon saying that, I disappeared into the house, retrieved only my bank book and personal seal from my room, and left the house immediately. Warren and his traitorous lover were crying, apologizing, begging for mercy and forgiveness, but I wouldn't hear a word they were saying anymore. I completely ignored his calls for the next few days until my in-laws finally contacted me to see what was going on. I told them the whole story, and they apologized wholeheartedly and were on board with the divorce. A few days later, I hired a lawyer, filed for alimony against Warren and Marnie, and the divorce was officially finalized. Afterwards, their workplace found out about their affair, and they both resigned voluntarily after being given the cold shoulder for a while thereafter. After that, my ex-husband asked his parents for financial help, and also for work, because they did run a successful fruit and vegetable store together, but they refused to help him and left him to his misery. They refused to give him any money to help him get by, and they're even finalizing the procedure of disowning him entirely. That's what Mr. and Mrs. Joplin told my parents when they came to their house to apologize. When I heard that story from Mom and Dad soon thereafter, the only thing I could say about Warren was good riddance. By the way, according to what my lawyer told me, his working extra hours at his job was a complete lie. My husband still got off work on time and was merely spending time with his girlfriend until it was probably a good time for him to head home after deceiving me into believing he was doing overtime. And during that business trip of mine to Boston, he actually spent a whopping 5 days at home with the woman. That was why he was doing something unusual, housework. It was to prepare for inviting her over. And when I unexpectedly came home a day early, he decided to pretend to be dangerously ill and let her escape while he was being rushed to the hospital. When I found out what had really happened, I blamed myself for being so blind to the fact that I had married such a man. After that, I made a fresh start and started living alone. Now, I'm working hard to forget all about this incident. My recent efforts in my work had been highly recognized, and my boss gave me the delightful news that I'm about to get a raise, so it should be nothing but smooth sailing for here onward. I've decided that I'm not getting married for a while, because this incident kind of ruined men for me. But I know I'll be willing to look for another person who will be right, given some time. For the time being, though, I'm spending every day with my main goal of climbing the ladder towards a successful career. Wish me luck, everyone.